I can dance. I'm doing the jig right.
All right. Okay. Okay, it's 5:45. We call the meeting to order. Roll call, please, Jen.
Amy Riddle Swanson.
Here.
Tanya Gooseby. Charlie Schneider.
Here.
Mark Hillman. Angie Skilling.
Here.
Carl Palmer.
Here.
Abe Smith. Dominique Stewart. Here. Rachel Henderson.
Here.
Okay, so we have a quorum. We sit the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, and our mission statement: the School District of the Menomonie area, by embracing the unique needs and using the strengths of our diverse community, is dedicated to preparing all students to become lifelong learners, caring individuals, and responsible citizens. Agenda order and revision. Does anyone have any suggested revisions for the agenda? None? Okay. I would like thoughts from the board. I would like not to impose a policy or to set a policy or change a policy, but just as a matter of course, as the board president myself, but I would like your approval. And if you don't approve, I would suggest that we put it on as an agenda item and discuss it. But I would like to, before communications each time, read the following and have it be known by everybody watching and in attendance. Here's what I suggest. The opinions, beliefs, and viewpoints expressed by the various speakers during community communications do not necessarily reflect the opinions, beliefs, and viewpoints of individual board members, the board as a whole, or the school district of the Menomonie area, nor do they reflect the official policies of the school district of the Menomonie area. Does anybody have any issues with that?
I do not, but I do want to ask a question after you're done about community comments in regards to email things that we received, because we received a question today
Okay.
that I thought perhaps could be read and answered.
Okay. Let's see if there's any questions or comments on this, and then we'll see where that goes.
I'm all for it.
Okay. All right. Then, for my tenure anyway, I will read that prior to community communication. I guess to some degree, Andy, we have to be somewhat careful where you want to go from an open meetings point of view. But what is it you're questioning? Whether we should comment on an email that we received, or
just in reading the question that she is asking.
okay, first of all, did all of us receive what you're speaking about?
I believe so. It looks that way. It was in, I guess, which maybe this could be addressed during the COVID discussion of our agenda, because it relates to ventilation in the buildings and
Okay.
what we have done in the past.
Sure.
I know that we have, and so that's why I thought.
Okay, I would suggest that would make sense there. Then. Yes.
That was what I was going to suggest, either that or the energy, but probably more the COVID.
And I think then to highlight, if there was not a relevant agenda item, we'd have to bring it back as a
Yes.
formal discussion item for a future meeting to run by the rules of open meeting.
Right.
That is correct.
All right. Now let's go back to the agenda. We have no recommendations or commendations? Okay. So on to public comment. We have 1, 2, 3 this evening, and I will, just as far as the formality, I'll read that again. The opinions, beliefs, and viewpoints expressed by the various speakers during community communications do not necessarily reflect the opinions, beliefs, and viewpoints of individual board members, the board as a whole, or the school district of the Menomonie area, nor do they reflect the official policies of the school district of the Menomonie area. So with that, Josie Pillman is going to speak about healthy families. As usual, please state your name and your address.
My name is Josie Pillman, and I live at 235 3rd Avenue East. That's in that, and that is in the Menomonie School District. Dr. Zajdowski, Mr. Chairman, and members of the board. Our community is crumbling. One tool we have to help restore it is to be intentional and proactive within the schools of the Sdma. The basic building block of a community is the family. The strongest, healthiest place to raise a child is in the traditional family. This looks like a husband, father, and wife, mother, married to each other in a committed relationship for life. When human families and sexuality is being taught to our students in Menomonie, we will want to be passing on this fact to them. This will mean teaching our students character and self-control. It will mean delayed gratification for the greater good. It will also mean correcting a faulty understanding of the family. Let's be clear, this will mean we need teachers with courage. When a human being is corrected or reprimanded, there will be a reaction. There may be angry outbursts or acting out in other ways. As parents and teachers, we should not be surprised, nor should we be intimidated or let the student have his own way to the injury of himself or those around him. I observe that every year there are new hires here at Sdma. We want you to hire teachers with character, teachers who can be the adult in the room. With all of the wisdom and courage of an adult, teachers should have the freedom, courage, and responsibility to correct wrong understandings of sexuality, and certainly to call out ideology that will further undermine our community. We want our children to become responsible citizens who will form healthy families for life. We want to hire teachers who have the character to correct immoral thinking, even if the student reacts with a temper tantrum. This will take teachers with courage, with moral character and fortitude. Dr. Zajdowski, can a school board member help you and the principals vet new hires? Can a community member sit in on the process, maybe just as an observer? Can we submit to you some questions you may ask new hires that might reveal something about their moral character? Remember, we as a community are hiring the teachers to educate our children. We want those teachers to be teaching strong morals and right character to our children. Self-control, kindness, respect for one another, restraint, sharing with others, generosity, courage, and humility are all demonstrations of sound character. Does our new hire have this kind of character? I think we can do better than we have been doing at Sdma. Adults do not need to submit to the meltdown of children. Teachers can bravely stand alone against immature, immoral judgments. Stabilizing the family will stabilize the community. Stable families will make for a better learning environment for the teachers to teach in, and thus grade scores will soar. Thank you.
Thank you. Suzette Neiman.
Starting, okay. First of all, I want to thank Abe for replying back to my email and taking the time to listen to the videos that Dr. Pesta put out, or that was video. As far as his credentials, he is a university professor of 35 years and a 10-year professor of English at the University of Wisconsin in Oshkosh. The last 10 years, he has been working on education reform. Now more on critical race theory, starting where I left off last time. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was one of the greatest Americans to ever live. He and others are our heroes and should be honored. Our children and grandchildren should be taught to take pride in their country, to respect our founding principles of liberty and equity, and to have a sense of American history that is both truthful and inspiring. Civics education should focus on serious study of our founding documents and principles, and should not encourage or coerce students into engaging in extracurricular political action on behalf of contemporary policy positions. Parents and residents across Wisconsin and the USA are standing up to teachers' unions, school boards, and elected officials that have infiltrated the school curriculum with CRT or principles of CRT. I condemn all those who continue to have racist attitudes and call on all Wisconsinites and Dunn County to stop treating American people differently on the basis of their race, even gender. I equally condemn CRT and any philosophy that brands an entire nation, community, etc., or any entire race as racist or calls for excusing immoral or criminal action because of race of the person who commits the crime. Teaching children to hate their country and each other is immoral and deeply harmful to our society and must be stopped. I believe that our young people should be taught to view one another not according to race or gender, but as individuals. Let's replace elected officials and leaders in our schools who promote CRT or its principles or any other race-based educational programs in our public, elementary, middle, and high school with new leaders who respect our history, values, our rights to choose what is the best for our children and the families and God-given dignity to every person. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Mike Cooper.
Good evening, Mike Cooper, E46274 153rd Avenue. Is it okay, Dr. Zajdowski, to ask you a couple of questions?
You're welcome to ask questions. I probably am not going to use this forum to get in a dialogue.
No.
But I certainly be willing to meet with you or answer questions you want to submit.
Because I was just going to ask some budgeting questions, like what % of the school budget is state property tax?
Anything else?
What's that?
Anything else?
Yeah, what the amount of budgeting is state tax and federal funding? Do you have any ideas?
Like I said, I'm not gonna get in a dialogue during the public comment.
No, I don't want to.
But if you want to submit questions, I'll get you the answer for sure.
Because what I've seen is that there's about 40% of the budget is property tax, 40% is roughly state funding, and then federal is somewhere in between what's left over. That's what I had seen. I just wanted to make sure if that was correct or not, that's all.
Like I said, if you want to submit it to me, I'd be happy to give you a complete answer.
So based on those numbers, what I was curious is that what kind of mandates come with those kinds of funding? And you know, there's the old saying, he who pays the fiddler calls the tune. And I'm thinking, property taxes are paying 40% of the school budget. State taxes are about 40%, which is collected from the people in the town, sent to Madison, and comes back anyway. So really, we're paying most of the freight. The federal government comes in and pays 5–10%, and they give us mandates. For example, in the Federalist magazine on June 2nd rather, there's an article about what the new requirements are going to be doing, and it says, if local parents don't let boys play on girls' sports teams, the federal government will remove its support from their extracurricular activities, including after-school sports and other programs kids use to stay healthy, active, and engaged. If local parents don't let boys into little girls' bathrooms, locker rooms, and showers, then the feds will make sure that the poorest children in their community don't get the school-provided lunches American taxpayers pay for. As many as 30 million children may use this program. In fact, if parents in any way interfere with the trans activist demands for the local districts for how local districts should operate, all federal tax support will be cut off. The people in the district are paying 60 to 80% of the budget. We have no voice. The federal government comes in and says, pays 10% and says, this is what you're going to do, and we're going to jump.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper.
Thank you.
And for Mr. Cooper or anybody else, there is a wealth of information about the school district budget online from both the annual meeting and we do a mid-year budget hearing in January. We also do have financial reports that could be available. We could get you a packet after the meeting if you would like. Or if you want to email me, like I said, I'd be happy to email or answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Okay, moving on
Charlie, could
to,
I say something real quick?
I'm sorry?
Could I say something real quick?
Sure.
Is this okay? An okay time?
Well, it depends on where you're going.
I just wanted to make a quick comment,
Okay,
in 1 minute or less.
all right.
There have been comments made in the last couple of meetings about critical race theory and about teaching about racism in our schools. And I think the timing of that has been kind of precipitated by a community presentation that happened recently. And I understand that that is something that folks have on their mind for that reason. But the first time it came up here, where a community member talked about critical race theory and the idea that racism is a thing of the past and doesn't need to be taught in their schools, was just days after a baldly racially motivated mass shooting in Buffalo. And I think it's been sitting on my heart to think about that for the last few weeks, because I think as a person who doesn't experience racism in this country, I don't think I have a right to tell anybody whether or not we're done with racism. And as a school board member, I do want to take a minute to speak back against that we have teachers in our district who do an amazing job of working with students from all races and taking the time in their classrooms to address the reality of what they experience day to day in our country. And it hurts to hear those efforts come under attack when I know that there are so many people in our communities who do still feel marginalized. So I wanted to share that. Thank you, Charlie.
All right, moving on to the revenue and expenditure reports for the month ended May 2022.
Okay, the first report that we'll take a look at is the revenue report. As Charlie mentioned, this is for year-to-date through May for the General Operations Fund, Fund 10. The total revenues received to date is $26,620,590.71. Revenues received in May were the personal property aid payment from the Wisconsin Department of Revenue. That is a payment we receive each May. And then we received other local revenues, including the mobile home tax payments. Moving on, our Fund 21 gift donation account. So far, we've received in $423,851.68. You'll notice that that amount is higher than the budgeted amount. This was the first year we made that transition from conversion from Fund 60 into Fund 21. So that is the reason why those revenues are higher. And so we always do a budget revision at the end of the year once all the revenues come in, expenses have been paid, and we'll do an adjustment to account for that.
Leah, before you move on, could you explain what Fund 60 is to all the board members?
Sure. Sorry. But Fund 60 was considered the student activity fund, and the Wisconsin Department of Education, there was a GASB, Government Accounting Standard, rule change on that, and our auditors recommended, because we don't have a trust set up specifically for those funds, and the school board oversees the spending of those funds or is involved in that. They recommended we put that into Fund 21 and take it out of 60, put it in 21.
Board members, any questions about the funds? I know that's one thing that we've tried to talk about, is make sure we use common language the best we can. So I just want to make sure everyone understands.
So Fund 60 essentially no longer exists. We did use it Fund 60, and now it's all in Fund 21.
Correct.
Okay.
And this change is a change that's been very common across the state. Most districts that I know of were using Fund 60 for student activities. So most districts have made this transition or have to make the transition.
There was some restrictions on Fund 60 and its available uses, correct?
Correct.
And would those restrictions remain as it moves over now to Fund 21, or do they go away?
They're set in board policy, we have not changed policy, so it's remaining the same.
Okay, thank you.
Basically, the student organizations have a say, they do fundraising, et cetera, and then they have a say along with their advisor on how they'd like to spend those fundraise funds.
Thank you.
Okay, and then moving on, Fund 27, special education revenues. To date, through the end of May, we received $2,142,009.06. The next report we'll take a look at is the expenditures by object breakdown. And this includes all funds, not just the general operation fund. Year to date, we're at 71.34% compared to 75.85%. And there were no noticeable, or there was nothing unusual in the month of May this year, just one timing of bills and purchases being made may differ from one year to the next. As I've noted in previous meetings, it was higher last year, mainly due to that refinancing under the debt service payment column. And then lastly, the expenditure breakdown by function. Again, we'll look at the general operations fund first. Year to date, we're at 70.35%. With encumbrances, we are at, or percent spent, we're at 69.38 compared to 67% last year at the same time. Fund 27, we're at 78.44 compared to 74.89. And then Fund 50, our food service fund, we're at 79.04 compared to 82.91. Any questions on any of those reports?
And before we get too far, I want to remind board members that you do have a laminated copy of the fund and the fund descriptions at your seat. Thanks, Leah.
Thank you. And the monthly employment reports. Any comments? Start with
I think this is just for
Yeah, this is informational. Are there any questions? Thank you.
And moving on to the consent agenda. Entertain a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second. Motion by Angie, seconded by Abe. Any questions? Lots of information here. No questions? No comments? All right, so been moved and seconded to approve the action agenda, which include the minutes from May 9th and May 23rd. Financial report, fund checks in the amount of $1,199,111.30, and cash receipts in the amount of $174,430.47 for the month of May 2022 as presented. Donations, $1,000 from the Mayo Foundation for the healthcare scholarship recipient, $5,000 also from Mayo for the special education department, and $2,500 from also Mayo for the Menomonie Middle School for the web project. And then we have the backup information below. No questions? Let's take a vote. Passes 6-0 with one abstention.
Board members, Charlie, if you don't mind, thank you for approving the donation receipt. At your tables, you'll notice that you have a book called What Happened to You? And Tonya Kwiski, our Director of Student Services, and a team of staff members are participating in a trauma book study. Additionally, the entire leadership team in the district is participating in a book study this summer using this book. It's come highly recommended. And because of that reason, we also provided the board members with a copy. Inside the book, you'll see the timeline that Tony put together that's going to guide the administrative discussions this summer. We're not suggesting that the board need to do this. You're certainly welcome to do it if that's something the board would want to do. But we are taking this very seriously. Trauma for our students is something that we have seen impacting our classrooms. Tony will talk more about that in her student services report at the next meeting, so we don't need to go into much detail, but that's what that book is all about. Thank you.
All right, then moving on to the personnel consent agenda.
I'll make a motion to.
I'll make a motion to approve that.
Second.
Motion by Angie, seconded by Dominique, to approve the personnel consent agenda. Lots going on here. You can see on your screen, resignations, retirements, request to hire, and then request for filling the vacancies. Any questions? Discussion?
Just have a comment that want to thank Sam and the rest of the HR and everyone who's worked so hard on these hires. It's nice to see a nice long list of hires every meeting.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, let's take a vote. Okay, motion passes 7-0. Moving on to the action agenda. Approve the preliminary budget, for 22-23.
I'll make a motion to approve the budget.
I'll second.
Motion by Angie, seconded by Carl. Discussion, Joe?
Last meeting, the board members also went through the budget. I did have a number of questions that we answered. Leah, is there anything since last meeting that you'd like to point out? I think we're all the same. Board members, did you have any other additional questions based on the last couple of weeks? I know you've all looked at it quite a bit. Okay, thank you.
No other questions, comments, discussion? All right, let's take a vote. Motion passes 7-0. Moving on to the next item, approve changes to the employee handbook. You have a copy of the revisions in your information. We discussed this at the last meeting. Entertain a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
Motion by Angie, seconded by Amy, to approve the employee handbook revisions. Discussion?
At the last school board meeting, when the board discussed the employee handbook, there was a suggestion to clean up some of the language in terms of unpaid leaves of absence and the benefits related to those. So I appreciate Sam took that information and added some language to ensure that everyone understood that that would be a prorated daily amount. That was the only change, I believe, since the last meeting.
Any other discussions, questions? Dave?
Since I had the opportunity to read through the handbook thoroughly, looking at revisions, I was struck by there's the process for, I'm sorry, I've just forgotten the word, for grievance procedures, right, for employees. And I'm kind of curious, it seemed like a very complicated process to me in terms of going to the supervisor, then to Sam, and then to independent outside observer, and then to the administration. I'm just kind of curious, how often has that actually been used? And has anyone kind of thought about other, maybe simpler processes or other standards across the state?
Thanks for the question, Abe. First of all, I would like to say that most conflict resolution does not run through the grievance process. This grievance process was drafted by attorneys from the Wisconsin School Board Association, and really it was designed based on the rules and regulations that came in at Act 10. So really it's quite limited to workplace safety issues and some disciplinary issues that are defined by state statute. In my time, in the 8 years, I think we've only had one situation where the grievance process actually played out and had an independent hearing officer and such. With that being noted, there are other chain of command resolution items. Very rarely do items make it up to my level at the district administrative office. Most items are handled at the building level. Once in a while, a district director, program director, or HR will help resolve an issue. If it doesn't get resolved at that level, then it would come to me. But like I said, most things are handled at the building level.
Thanks.
Any other questions, discussion? Okay, hearing none, let's vote on the changes to the employee handbook. Motion passes 7-0. Moving on to the student and parent handbooks for 22-23. Again, we discussed at the last meeting, lots of information here on the page. Looking for a motion to approve.
So,
I'll second that.
Motion by Dave, second by Angie to approve the student parent handbooks. Discussion, Joe?
Again, the board reviewed these handbooks, was it 2 weeks ago or 3? I can't remember if was it 3? At the last school board meeting. And at that time, board members had some suggestions that have been included in the final versions up for your approval tonight. There was a suggestion to include information about the Angel Fund. There was also a suggestion in terms of school closings to make that language more current and reflect social media and the other ways that we announce school closings. Since that time, we also recognize the need to provide a deadline for parents who would like to request boundary exemptions for the elementary school level. When we receive the exception request so late in the school year, it makes it difficult working with our teachers and making sure that we have our staffing balanced to our enrollment needs. There still is a provision, you'll see in there, that would allow for extenuating circumstances to be considered. However, we would like those requests by May 1st, whereas it was just open-ended before. This will allow us to have our elementary principals review those earlier and then be able to communicate with families and with the staff and our faculty members earlier. So we have added that to these recommendations as well.
Any discussions, questions? Okay, hearing none. Vote to approve the handbooks. Okay, motion passes 7-0. And the last item on our action agenda, revision to policy 163.1, school board memberships. Angie has requested this. I guess first we entertain a motion to make the change.
I'll make it.
I'll make a motion to make a change to policy 163 dash, oops.
Have a second to that? Looking for a second. One last time for a second. Okay, so we had a motion on the table for, to no longer require the district to be a part of the National Association of School Boards. We have a motion without a second. The motion dies without a second. Moving on to discussion items. The annual energy report.
So we have Justin Shenneman here, our district energy manager. He's the first district energy manager we've had in the school district of the Menomonie area. And I'm very impressed with what he's been able to do. And when you look at the report, I think you will be too. But Justin, he's not going to read his whole report for you, but he is going to provide a summary view, and you can see some of the great work he's done. So Justin, thanks for being here, bud, and take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Zadowski. So I just wanted to touch on a few highlights of the report and just kind of show where we're at and where I think we maybe can head. So over the last year, our electric use is down 18% from the average and 16% from the previous fiscal year. Natural gas use is down 16% from the average and 21% from the last fiscal year. And comparing it to last fiscal year, that represents around 700,000 kilowatt hours of use that we reduced, and about 61,000 therms for natural gas, which is pretty significant. Looking at and how this year compared to others, the heating degree days were up in comparison to average, and the cooling degree days were a little bit down. Just to give some reference to our use, those are a measure of how cold is it or how warm is it during the heating and cooling seasons in comparison to a baseline. Our average Energy Star score, we do benchmarking using Portfolio Manager, and our average Energy Star score went from 73 up to 86, which is a comparison to other buildings that are similar to what we have in our district. And our carbon emissions dropped by about 17% from the previous year, representing approximately 800 tons of CO2 emissions reduced. The middle school solar project should be breaking ground around the end of this month or beginning of next month, and is anticipated to have an 8 or 9 year payback. And then where I see us going in the future, I think we'll continue to pursue LED projects at our schools. The most recent bidding process did not end up working out due to supply issues and the just availability of labor to complete that big of a project. And if the middle school project finishes well, and after we see how it's producing, I could see us pursuing further projects at other buildings in the future as well. And then looking at building envelope upgrades to help reduce our heat loss or heat gain in our buildings. As everyone has seen, the energy market is increasing. Conserving energy is going to become more important as time continues. Both natural gas and electric are up significantly. And I think that can be seen even though we're having reductions, our actual expenditures on energy have gone modestly up. And then just to expect possibly continued volatility in the market moving forward. Any questions?
Any questions for Justin?
First, I'm going to say this report is amazing. It is beautiful graphs, great detail. It's just absolutely beautiful. As a board, we previously discussed the idea of, I think this is in the private part of the board docs, about taking some of these reports and maybe find a way to publicize them and get them out publicly. So I think hopefully the board might discuss that, I don't know, at an appropriate time. I think this is the example of a report which is both really well constructed and shows how much the district is actually doing. There's a specific recommendation in the proposal on page 12. It says, using this as a template for future projects, it's recommended to pursue an additional 2 or 3 schools in the next 1 to 2 years to take advantage of these benefits. And there's a question of like which buildings and which sites and so on. So it sounds like the middle school project is starting up in terms of actual construction. So is there kind of a thought about when the board would have to consider doing additional projects? Is that a 1 year from now, 2 years from now, 6 months from now? Do we have a sense of when that might be?
That's a really good question, Abe, and I think that's something that the board is going to have to determine for the district. My suggestion would be that we see how the middle school project ends up. It is pretty difficult right now with supply chain and with labor, but we did have a really good bid, and we're very optimistic that that bid will be done the way it was constructed, and we should see the payback that we're anticipating. But I do think we also are staring at a fiscal cliff at the state level, which the board may want to kind of see how that resolves itself coming off of COVID and the pandemic. But Justin, maybe you could speak a little bit about what you think. I know you mentioned a few opportunities, but if you were to talk about the next step in your mind, what would it be?
Yeah, so just touching on the bid that you talked about for the middle school real quick, we got it down to $1.23 per watt after the incentives through Focus on Energy and the donated panels that we were able to utilize for the project, which is a very good price for solar installations. Looking at other schools, it would depend on what the board and administration would want to pursue. A couple different options would be the high school. It has the most expensive rate structure, so that would be another good option. Downingsville Elementary, considering they run geothermal and all heat pumps, they don't use natural gas at that facility. So what we could do there is, if you were to put in an appropriately sized system, you could have basically a net zero school, because you wouldn't have to overcome that large natural gas carbon load. And those are two of the schools that I see could work out best. The high school would likely, due to green space, have to be a roof mount, where the other buildings could be ground mounts, similar to the middle school's proposal.
You postponed the LED projects that you had planned, all of them that you had planned for this summer,
Correct.
which includes the middle school. So you were working on a rate reduction at the middle school, right? So that's, the solar project will not be enough to offset to keep us on that, to get us to the lower rate, correct?
I do not believe so.
And to follow up on that, Director of Building and Grounds, Kevin Tomaszewski, he'll be here at an upcoming school board meeting. He'll be able to speak more to the projects that are going on this summer. I know he was extremely disappointed, but there was no way to move forward with the project. He did talk to some of the electricians that he had felt would bid on the project, and he has some ideas of how he can move that forward by maybe splitting the project up a little bit. But the labor shortage and the supply chain just made it impossible to move forward like he had hoped.
I would just urge you to put emphasis on the middle school because of that rate change that would incur because of that. It's much more important to do it at the middle school first than at Oak Lawn or Wakanda as a first.
I agree.
I just wanted to second what Abe said. You beat me to the punch, but that's a great report. For somebody that's a layperson who doesn't understand energy, it was very easy to understand, and so thank you.
Thank you.
The graphs are beautiful.
Yes, they were.
Any other discussion, questions? Thank you, Justin, well done.
Thanks, Joe.
All right, and moving on to the Human Resources Report.
All right, that's me. Thanks again for going before me. So I'm going to start just real quickly as a to kind of introduce. I will go through everything that you received in the report, but as a reminder, Human Resources does a little bit more than just the hiring and the onboarding. We manage all the background checks for the district. We issue all of the contracts that come out into the district. We handle staff licensing as well, so for administrators, teachers, paras, pupil services. We handle workers' compensation, FMLA, unemployment, and do the wage and salary comparables from year to year as well. So there's a lot that goes on in our department. There are 2 of us that are in our department that make up the Human Resources Department, the HR assistant Crystal Remendino and myself. And so we tend to be a little bit busy with everything that's going on. So moving into the board report that was shared with you, just to look at the staffing totals and as a kind of a comparison to last year. Last year we had a total of 469 staff members. This year we have 443. And if you look at the breakdown, you'll notice that the numbers there come specifically from the teachers and specialists and the custodial staff. And so as you remember, we're coming off of the COVID year where we had hired additional staff to keep our class sizes small and to keep our classrooms clean and safe. And so with that, we've been able to hire some of those folks into other positions that are continuing, or they have been laid off or moved on, quit and moved into other positions as well. So you can kind of see, moving on to the substitute staffing, we will get to that. There's something that's a little bit more of a breakdown with that, but you can kind of see there's 4 years of substitute staff information. Last year, or this year I should say, this previous year, I was happy that we were, at the end of the year, able to look at this and see that we were close with the number of current active substitute teachers, and even kind of went way above with our substitute support staff. And so I do believe that the incentive that we used to bring in substitute teachers was very helpful in allowing us to make sure that we had enough substitute teachers specifically to cover our classrooms. So any questions about the information at the top of this page? And if you have questions along the way, just let me know. And then you can kind of see the second part of this first page is a breakdown of what we have as far as classifications within the district and the number of years of service with the district. So we are a very kind of, I wouldn't say young, but maybe just new to teaching district, where we have a majority of the employees that we have been with us for 0 to 5 years. Moving on to the exiting staff statistics, I know that there was, we've probably had a lot of questions about the resignations, and we'll kind of point that out right away with regard to teacher resignations, that this year that has almost doubled. And so looking at the reasons behind each of those, we were able to break those down and look at those specifically based on the information that we were given, whether that most of that, if not all of it, comes from my conversations or emails with our staff members. So when they send in a resignation email, I will respond to them, and majority of the time they will share with me what their next steps are, as well as we use our exit surveys to help with some of this information as well. So just to kind of pull all of the information together, out of the 29 resignations, 10 accepted a position in a different district or closer to family. And I think what I'm seeing with that is there's just more opportunity for people to move at this point. And so if they're finding a position that's closer to family, that's usually the #1 reason that people are accepting a job elsewhere. They may have accepted a promotion within this group, accepted a promotion either in leadership or in higher education. 6 accepted a position outside of education, so where they were leaving education completely. Could be for family reasons, to work with a family business. There's a couple that mentioned that as well. 5 for personal or health reasons. 3 of them they were on a 1-year contract, and so those contracts were no longer continued. And then one was that, was someone that was working in a part-time position, and that position turned full-time, and she was not interested in continuing with that position. So any questions there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What, and I think I asked this in the past, but what benchmarks do we have, both from a positive or negative standpoint, however you want to look at it? 29 is up here for staff leaving, but we see they're leaving in other districts as well. So, what benchmark is there to help us understand how we compare, even though I don't want to see 29, right? But both, and the way this was presented, we have turnover, right, percent per year, whatever, and then we have longevity, and those are two different kind of concepts, and depending on who you ask, someone will say one's more important than the other when you're trying to judge this. But I would be interested in the near future as we look at work plan adjustments to have some benchmarks, both local, regional, national. Not today, I'm not putting you on the spot by any means, but I would like to see that if possible.
No, I think that's a great question. I do know, like, national average, what I have read statistically is about 8%, is what we're seeing nationally. And so if you do the math on this, we're at about 11%, so we're slightly above the national average. As far as state is concerned, I'm not sure about that.
And I do think it's important to point out too that demographics, especially in a school district where we're not a large corporation, demographics can really swing that quite a bit. And we did have, if you recall, our post-employment benefit curve from our mid-year budget hearing, we did have a peak in retirements. So I think we had a staff that had kind of turned over pre-COVID, whereas I think some districts haven't quite gotten to that curve yet. But yeah, I think that's something that definitely could be studied.
My follow-up to that also was I meant to ask you, 50 of the teachers have been here 20 plus years, which is amazing, right? Do we have an idea of when those teachers are going to be retiring? That's a big chunk. It was,
They're gonna work till they're 100.
I haven't looked at it, it's a pretty notable percentage. It's 20% of our teachers are over 20-year veterans, which is great, but what do we know about them?
So I work with the business office, and that's all kept track of, and so we know, we have a list of all of the teachers and when they're eligible for retirement, and so we do keep track of that. There's not a whole lot of communication with them unless they reach out to us. Typically, they will want to know what their benefits are, and so we have an indication at that point, whether it's a year from when they plan to retire or 6 months from when they plan to retire, and we'll start to get an indication that maybe they're looking at that. But we do have all of that information in the business office.
I also think it's worth noting that pre-COVID, we were beginning to see teachers, not every teacher, but we were beginning to see a trend of teachers working later. And what I mean by that is a teacher can retire under the Wisconsin retirement system generally at age 55. There is a benefit to waiting until age 57. And some teachers were going to 60 or maybe even longer. I do think COVID kind of stopped that trend a little bit. And also with the shortage of teachers across the nation, we have seen in some situations where a teacher will retire and then go teach in a different state. And there is a way for teachers to do that, to either pause their WRS annuity or take the WRS if they're going to a different state. Teachers used to be able to do that within the state of Wisconsin, but that has been significantly limited, and I know that's something we've advocated for, especially in the midst of the teacher shortage, to be able to allow teachers to retire but then continue to work if that's something they choose to do. So COVID, the pandemic definitely has impacted this, and it's going to be really interesting to see how it affects the different trends.
I have one question. What percentage of the teachers actually send back the exit survey? Do you get them back, and are you guys aggressive in trying to get them?
Yeah, we don't necessarily hound them. We send them out as soon as we get their resignation letters. I would say a good percentage do return them. The survey is not that long, but it does get pretty in-depth with the things that we would like to know about. I can get a percentage for you if you would like, but I would say that it's a fairly decent amount that do return those.
Okay. Is it sent via email or?
Yes, yep, it's a Google form, so it's very easy for them to just kind of click and answer those questions, or add comments if they would like.
Okay.
I also had a question about the exit survey. And this is kind of might not be answerable or need an answer tonight, but I kind of wanted to start a conversation. The information you list here about reasons for departing is really helpful and insightful, and it's really useful information. But I was wondering what else, like what the other questions are in the exit survey, and sort of two-part question, like sort of what else we can glean from that, and then if there's a way that the information you get from that could be anonymized or aggregated in a way that the board could look at it or use it. And Carl mentioned our upcoming work plan, annual work plan planning, work plan planning. And one of our pillars is related to our talented workforce and staff retention. So having information from that could be really useful.
Sure, yeah. The hard thing about it is that right now there is can be some kind of identifying information in there. So we would want to be careful about, how much of that is shared. But we can certainly work on that, absolutely. And I'm always open to suggestions for changing that and adding things that would be helpful.
Of these, I guess it's a total of 34 teachers leaving, 29 resignations plus 5 retirements. Of those positions which are presumably opening up, how many of them are successfully rehired versus not being rehired because they're no longer needed versus maybe in the hiring process?
Absolutely. So right now, 15 of the, actually, I'm going to back up, all five of the retirements have been rehired, whether that means that we transition somebody within the district into that position and then refilled their position. So all 5 of the retirements have been filled. 15 out of the 29 have been filled at this point with contracted employees. And then we're working on 10 of them right now. And so those are either we've interviewed, it's anywhere in the continuum. A couple of these resignations came in on Thursday, so we've posted those positions, but have not obviously had the time to pull together the candidate pool and interview. So 10 out of the 29 we're working on, and then 4 at this point we are either not filling because they were one-year positions, or they've been filled with like an attrition, so somebody moving into another position to cover that.
Well, I have one question, Sam, or maybe more of a request. I think it would be interesting to see in the future, in your teacher segment especially, the years of experience that the teacher has as a teacher, not necessarily the years of experience as a teacher within our district. Because I know often you hire teachers that are not first-year teachers. So that 90, I'm sure, is not people who have 0 to 5 years of experience, or at least all of them. I think that would be interesting to see that.
Okay, sure.
I was going to ask the same thing, so thanks, yeah. When Rachel mentioned the kind of looking at the exit survey, one thing that occurs to me is that the response accepted the position in a different district closer to family. It's certainly true that people move around for all sorts of reasons. I guess, and I don't want to, to me that response feels a little bit like it's not you, it's me when you're breaking up with someone, right? They're like saying, well, I just want to be close to my family. I feel like people are always live apart from their extended families for all sorts of reasons. And if they're really, really happy where they are, that's usually not enough of a reason to move, right? So I think I can kind of see that answer both ways. Like, okay, what are they really not saying in that response? So that's just an impression I had.
And that's where I think the exit survey comes into, is getting a little bit more detail when they're willing to share more in a narrative. But again, you know, a lot of it does come from just the conversation that I have with them via email or in person, that they share, you know, yep, I've taken a job somewhere else. I would say too that recently this year, what I believe has been a factor is just the increase in gas prices, and people are really, I think, evaluating where they work and if there is something that's closer. Again, that's not something that has been verified. Nobody has come to me and said, I'm accepting a job 5 minutes from my house because gas is too expensive. But it's not lost. I completely understand. You're right. If you're happy in your district, those other factors are going to be less of an issue, for sure.
But in looking at the 10, because that's what it was, right, 10?
Yes.
I'm aware of some of those that got married and wanted to, you know, move somewhere with their spouse. I'm aware of some that live in a different community and a job in that community opened up for teaching. And it's a real thing. I mean, I don't know if I would drive a half hour, as much as I love working here, I don't know that I would drive a half hour if, you know, the similar position was in the community I lived in. We also do have some situations where people are from a different part of the state, and it's a pretty significant trip for them to go home to see their parents or whoever. So I'm not discounting what you're saying at all, but if the number's only 10, I can tell you that a good percentage of that is legitimately people wanted to relocate. And it is, I mean, there are positions in virtually every single district, and it's a tough environment right now. I also want to point out that I was at a leadership Menomonie presentation. The mayor, the county administrator, and myself were putting on a presentation for people in Menomonie, and a lot of the questions talked about housing and concerns about housing in Menomonie. And I think when you look at this, I do think housing has been a big issue for many of the major employers in our community, and we're not immune to that. There are not many opportunities for entry-level teachers, not many opportunities for a number of our employees to purchase an entry-level home in our community. So they are choosing to buy a home somewhere else, and then all of a sudden you run into the gas prices and you run into all these other opportunities. It becomes more difficult to retain these people. So I would second what many of our companies in town are saying. This housing issue needs to be addressed, or it's going to hurt the school district as well as other places.
That's a really good point. In terms of the responses, diving in a little bit more, I certainly don't claim that all 10 of those 10, you know, are kind of hiding something, but it just kind of struck me as a response which is a little bit kind of ambiguous. And I think that these things are often, the reasons we have for choosing where to live and where to work are often kind of subconscious and involve a maelstrom of different factors. And so the ones I see which are kind of concerning are the 6 accepted position outside of education stays left the field. 5 for personal or health reasons. So that, I mean, people are, maybe that means they got ill and can't keep up the workload. Maybe it means that they just are worn out, or and then of those 10, maybe a few who that's the kind of reason they wrote down for other reasons. So that's maybe in the low teens of that 30-something, which are of the 29 rather, which is a pretty significant bracket. It's not clear from these responses, but might be kind of discontent for all sorts of reasons, maybe including gas prices and all these other factors as well. So.
And I do think culture is critical, and I do think there are improvements in culture that could help reduce these numbers. I am looking forward to our staff survey this fall. We did one 3 years ago, and I'm looking forward to seeing, and I'm expecting some difficult responses. It's been tough. Education has been very difficult. It was difficult before the pandemic, and then with the pandemic, and then with a number of difficult political issues coupled on, I do think it's a really tough environment right now, and I'm looking forward to seeing the results of that survey and trying to identify some ways that we can improve our culture and hopefully make Menomonie the most attractive school district it can be.
not to mention that fewer and fewer people are going into education at the undergraduate level. I work with those students every day, and I used to have my majority of my students I work with were education majors, and now I'm lucky out of my 50 or 60 students on my caseload, if I have one or two.
And I'll tell you what baffles me, because of the change in people interested in going into teaching, programs have been reduced. And I'm not going to name the school, but and it's not Stout, but there's a school in our region where they're turning people away from the education program. And it's becoming a competition to get into the program. And I get it, you know, if you're seeing a reduction in your program, and universities have been underfunded, it's not just people choosing not to go into education. It's also the system, I think, making adjustments, and that's impacting us as well.
You know, because of the testing and some of that, you know, you can do some waivers now, but with so much testing and, education majors where they have to go through so many benchmarks before they can actually be in the program, yeah, there's a lot of that too, you're right.
Any other discussion, questions?
I would just end it and say that I see this as opportunity. This is not negative stuff in front of us, and that hopefully you're not feeling that way. Because I'm thinking about sitting in your office, and as you double the number of hires you're doing, that's taking you away from doing things that might be supporting the culture of the staff that are still here. And so these few numbers, this 10%, 11% that left, that's the canary, so to speak, in the mine shaft. But the ones we are most concerned with is the ones that are still here. Let's work to learn what will keep them here and have the best district. So I'm also looking forward to the work plan process. I think this is all opportunity.
And I guess I would end by saying that some of that culture is on us as a board, us as a staff, and us as a community. If we as a board beat each other up week after week after week, and beat up the school district week after week after week, and you're a high school senior out there thinking about what you're going to do for school, do you think that they're going to want to go into education? We need to show the good side of what's going on here as well, and not just the bad side. I'm not saying that we hide the bad, but we need to show the good as well. That's incumbent on us, and how we interact with each other, and how we interact as a community. I think that's very important. Education has gotten a bad rap in the last decade or a couple decades, but some of that we brought on ourselves, from the people who've been sitting here and the people who, as we as a community, interact. So I just remind everybody that we play a part in that. So thank you, Sam, for your,
And I just want to say one more thing. This is completely, especially the hiring piece, is a very much a collaborative effort. And I do not do this in a silo. Every one of these people that, are sitting here with me, every one of the principals, and from time to time, we also get, other staff members that sit in with us. I could not do this, we could not do this without each other. And to kind of piggyback on what Charlie said, it takes a collaborative effort. It takes all of us working together, our hourly staff, our teachers, our administrators, and our board, and to make this work. And so we very much appreciate your support, and view this as a collaborative effort, that we're working together to make this the best experience for our kids possible and the best place for our staff to work.
One really quick comment, since I praised Justin's report. So this is also a great report. It's very clear, and we had a very thoughtful discussion here. I think the quality, like the data you presented, facilitates that in a really clear way. So thank you.
I'll try to include pretty graphs.
I just wanted to echo that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you, Sam, and thank you for all of your hard work throughout the year as well. I'm sure that it hasn't been a lot of fun trying to keep reels on a daily basis, so thank you.
I love it. It's where I'm meant to be, so thank you.
Okay, with that, let's move on to the reviewing the Sdma Education for Employment Plan.
So we have not only Brian Seguin here, but we also have Mr. Sterry, and he's always welcome, and it's always nice to have you here, Ryan. But you guys, go ahead and take it away.
All right, well, thank you. And we're going to try and give an equally good report here
this evening.
Hey, Brian, why don't you pull that microphone and give Mr. Sterry the other one?
There you go, perfect.
We want to make sure people can hear what this is about.
All right, so education for employment, I'm not going to read, or we're not going to read everything that's on the slides, but we want to give you an overview and then open it up for questions here this evening as well. But a little bit of history about what is education for employment, or E for E. So it was established in 1985, so from a history standpoint, that's back when I was 10. And then it has been updated, and just pointing that out, back when I was 10. Ryan must have been 9.
I was 10 too, yeah, all the same.
But it's been updated several times since that point in time to keep it current. Most recently was back in 2013 to add in academic and career planning, which is something that our district has been working on since that point in time, and that it was fully implemented in grades 6 through 12 in 2017 through 18. And I remember as a classroom teacher working on Ed for Employment before ACP was part of it. And we were happy to see that this was something that gained some additional legs at the state level. And we're provided this format in which to put plans together. We're required by statute to bring this forward to discuss on an annual basis. In July, this will come back for you to formally approve it. And really it's to give a quick snapshot of our local community, what the employment needs and demands are based off of some local information, but then to talk about how districts are responding to that. As a district, academic and career planning is really where we focus on meeting the needs for education for employment and taking a look at how do we successfully transition our students through our different levels. Statute requires 6 through 12. We do have an element at the elementary level where we do some career exploration, and that's a next step over the next few years that we'll continue to work on. But each year we do take a look at the local labor markets, and Ryan, I'm glad that Mr. Sterry is here to talk a little bit about that. We pull most of the information out of a workforce profile for our county, and the idea is to get this as local as possible, as opposed to looking at, we want to consider national trends, but what does the local market really take a look at? And we have information from 5 of the top 5 industries or classifications that are highlighted in here. The state reports break it into 11 categories, and you're going to see that we have that for those top 5. You're going to notice that some of the years, will go back, where I'll refer to 2022 and 2021, and that's based off of the most recent information that's available, because some of that data will lay 1 to 2 years as part of the report. So, Mr. Sterry, if you want to talk a little bit about the labor markets.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Brian, and thanks for having me. I enjoy being here. The labor market information, as you can kind of see, that's based in Dunn County, and we really feel that this is an important part of the education for employment component. Just determining what industries are predominant in the Dunn County area, what the wages look like. You can kind of see the wage distribution per industry, what the average salaries are, and then in some cases, what the employment trends look like. And you'll notice with the employment trends, you might say, okay, look at manufacturing, or look at a certain area, look at an agri-science or those areas. Why isn't that on the employment projection? What that employment projection determines is just how many vacancies that folks from DWD feel can get filled. Just like anything else. Sometimes we have job openings and we want to fill them, but they may or may not get filled due to the skills gap or employment gaps or whatever the case might be. Now, this information we use a lot within career and technical education, and I act as a career and technical education coordinator. First of all, helps us drive our curriculum. And our curriculum is based on really, triangulating the standards, this labor market information, as well as folks from industry that make up our advisement committees to drive our curriculum. So hopefully we can offer the most relevant and rigorous curriculum possible. And also from that, we also use it a lot for grant writing as well. A large part of funding in career and technical education is our CT incentive grant. And that's based on students earning industry certifications. This last year, we had over 50 students that earned them where we could be eligible for upwards to over $50,000 based on those certifications and employment needs, not only in our county, but in that case, our state, as well as our Carl Perkins funding. So on our Carl Perkins grant, which will be out here any day now, I'm looking for that, is we'll use all of this labor market information in the grant, so that way when we fund our programs, we're funding for areas that with students, it's going to lead to jobs and jobs that are good paying. And you know, from this kind of piggybacking off this has created a lot of opportunity within our areas and all of our CTE components, the advisory meetings, you know, coupled with this labor market information. It's led to our CNA Academy, where we do offer a CNA program every year that's funded through through this type of work. We've added a business management academy. We're looking at a healthcare academy. Just last week, and I really got to commend Brian and Casey, they sat through a very, very long meeting on Thursday with some folks from CBTC that are creating a nonprofit organization to fund areas in our machine tool program that may have a lot of equipment, instructor training, and super opportunities for us. So that's really, you know, with this, that's really helped, I think, move our programs ahead and continue to make them as relevant and current and offer the best opportunities for kids as possible. And what else that leads us into, and Brian will talk more about that, is our academic and career planning. And we really feel that, you know, it's one thing for kids to, you know, take courses at our school, but another thing to understand why they're relevant. And I think one of the biggest parts of, for sure, in our areas, and I think, you know, at one point being a high school student, is knowing what I wanted to do at an early age, so that way I could take courses that were relevant towards those types of areas, you know, and it's just that way when kids graduate from high school, they know the direction they're going to go, whether it's directly into a career, whether it's an apprenticeship program, you know, tech school, college, whatever the case might be. And, you know, with this type of information, we can get this in the hands of kids, and then when we have a solid academic career plan, now they can figure out what it is they want to do and take classes to hopefully better prepare them for that. So Brian's going to talk a little bit about the academic career plan, but there's really been, we've put a lot of focus on that over these last few years. In fact, we got a committee meeting over the summer, so that way, you know, we can continue to grow that program.
Thank you, Mr. Sterry. So as Ryan talked about academic and career planning, really taking a look at where are our kids going, what types of careers might they be interested in. And you know, we have some information in here about post-secondary enrollment trends over the years. You know, we've noticed that we've seen a bit of a dip the last, we would have been in the 2019-2020 school year. But we do take a look at students enrolling at any point after they graduate by their cohort. And nationally, we did see a bit of a dip in the 1920 school year, students delaying entry into post-secondary education. And then look year by year, where do our kids tend to go to school. And it fluctuates a little bit. We still do see more of our students going on to a 4-year institution than we do in a 2-year institution. And some cohorts will be a little closer to balance between those two. But that really speaks then to the importance of our ACP process. And really with that, what we try to do is make sure that as students progress through their courses, there's a component that shows how they would apply the information that they learn in their courses to post-secondary options, whether that's going directly into a post-secondary educational experience or into the workforce, or you know, some combination thereof. On an annual basis, our staff will go through and look to make sure that at least quarterly, but in most cases more frequently than that, there are some very targeted career planning activities that take place at both the middle school and the high school level. And I give our staff a lot of credit for going through and after doing this for a handful of years, going back and revamping what those opportunities have been. And then part of this plan has a link to the scope and sequence and the types of activities that the students will do. So an example, at the middle school, it may be guest speakers coming into a class or into a grade level, and at the middle school, they refer to them as pod talks, where throughout the different grade levels in each pod, students will hear a speaker talk about different careers and different opportunities that way, working their way on up to, at some point in time, students may be doing some type of a job shadow, and then how does that transition into, in some cases, students working in internships as they work their way through. And then just the opportunity to explore different career options. I know one of the things that came out of this, I can talk about my own son who's going into his senior year of high school experience. He came home in 6th grade, and I had no idea the number of engineering positions that were out there because they were things that were identified for him, where our younger son, completely different types of experiences, and it has been really beneficial to us as parents to be able to talk with our kids about those experiences. So as students go into next school year, at each of the levels, they'll have the opportunity to have some exposure to different options. And then last school year, our 4th and 5th grade students had the opportunity to pilot some updated career exploration opportunities as well. So at this point, we'll go ahead and open it up for the questions.
Just 2 little data questions. These slides are gorgeous. Got to do it before Brent, you could. So, they could. What do we call the West Central Wisconsin employment? Like, what counties are we talking about besides Dunn?
So, are you referring to
the projections?
Oh, the projections. You take a look at Dunn, Eau Claire, Chippewa, and I believe Pierce would be there.
St. Croix is not?
I don't know if it is or not.
I would have to revisit that to know exactly which counties are in that, but we most definitely can do that.
St. Croix, why? Just wondering. St. Croix probably has the greatest growth of all of them.
Right
there. And then just another quick short one. The post-secondary enrollment totals, that graph ended in 19 and 20, right? And the next one was class of 2021. So do we have a percent that would be 2020, 2021 that's based on the second graph that didn't make it the first trend?
So
different data source.
Yep. So because students, that would be slide, you're referring to slide 9 and 10, I believe?
Yep.
Okay. So in slide 9, that data, as far as releasing it publicly, because they will take a look at students who enroll in the first, second, or third semester after graduation, is always going to lag a year behind the previous, or the following slide. So slide 10, for example, that's taking a look at just those students who graduated last school year, and we haven't gotten yet to the full cycle of that. Yep.
Did it seem that was similar, or did it seem that was similar, or gone down some more in your so far in the early data?
I would have to go back and take a look at that. I think it looked like it was maybe a little bit higher, but I would have to look to be certain on that. And one of the things as we look back, and when we look at students who will enroll at any time as part of their cohort, what we tend to see as the further back we go, that number will increase the next time we run the report, because students will enroll the 4th semester or 5th semester after they graduate, and they'll get back into that report. So if we look at 2018, 19, a year from now, that figure may be a little bit higher.
Yeah, I'll follow up with that. So that's sort of my question too, is you look at post-secondary enrollment, and I looked at a lot of the enrollment figures from the post-secondary institution perspective. And one thing we definitely notice is that a lot of students, especially the last 2 years, are like taking a gap year, right? Trying to figure out, like, is my school going to be open? Do I really want to go to a different city in these situations and so on? And I think, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I think the enrollment at the college here, Stout, has gone up a small margin in that last year, but not bouncing back completely. And so that question we have, we look at like say 2018, 2019 enrollment. You said that's up to 3 semesters later. Okay, so that catches people who might have taken a year off before going, or I shouldn't say off, did something else before going to a post-secondary institution.
Yeah.
Data that might not be available, but would be very interesting if it's possible to gather it with surveys or something, is how many students are still enrolled, say 2 semesters into college, into a 2-year four-year institution. That's something from the college perspective that is always very concerning, is you might see very high enrollment in a freshman class, and then by the time they're 3rd semester, a lot of people drop out or leave for all sorts of reasons, and so sort of a proxy of how many people enroll successfully, let's say in quotes, is a very difficult thing to capture, but very important. But one thing I want to point out, which since these slides aren't up publicly yet, is that almost everyone's working retirement age, right? But there's many high schoolers listening. So in Dunn County, the second fastest growth sector is construction, 14% growth projected, and it has 37% higher average wages than the average wage in the county. So there's some career advice for you.
I have one last question. Based on our last conversation, I read something very briefly about schools that were looking at career tracks for teachers, like growing your own teachers. Favorite show ever, Little House on the Prairie. Laura was a student and then she was the teacher. So is that something that might fit someday under this?
So the short answer is yes. Last week I had the opportunity to participate in an advisory committee at a local university that is also in our town. And one of the things that they were talking about is potential dual credit opportunities, something else that we work to increase the amount of dual credit opportunities, but to help address teacher shortages and programs like that. So something we've got our eye on. CDTC is also looking at a licensure program with one of our partners as well.
I was going to ask a really similar question, but I also just wanted to tack on, in addition to teaching positions or career paths like speech pathology or mental health, which we know we have a severe lack of in the county, but that Stout actually has 2 professional programs, and I wondered if there were opportunities there.
I don't know the answer, but one of the things, obviously, we work very closely with trying to help support wherever the vacancies in our community are.
Thank you.
I'd just like to say that this E, I've been on the board a long time, and this E4E has really gotten better and better every year. I remember the first year didn't have much, and as each year went on, it's gotten better and better, so I appreciate that.
Maybe, Dr. Joe, this is a better question for you, but piggybacking on what Abe said, I was going to mention that as well. I sat through a presentation by some university folks, UW-Madison actually, and they mentioned that if the student drops out after the first year, that's on the school. If the student drops on the high school, if the student drops out in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th year, that's on the university. And so they were talking about high schools, please send us students who are ready for us. Do we or could we track that to see how successful we've been in sending kids that then progress into that 2nd, 3rd, and 4th year by survey or something like that?
So it gets a bit tricky the further out they get. And I'm going to look at Ryan here a little bit because I know we in the past have done some follow-up surveying, and a lot of times we struggle to get responses the further out it gets. That being said, it's not that it can't be done. The state has done a nice job. The post-enrollment trend report helps us go further out than we ever had. And I know that is one of the things that they're talking about, trying to expand that. Now, being able to track university by university, we are able to mine some additional data as to in-state and out-of-state, but we could spend some time looking to see if there's some additional information.
And I do survey students that are a year out for a complete or follow-up report. So students that have taken 3 or more career and tech ed classes within their area or program of study, they do get surveyed. Last year, that's probably around 90 students or so.
It's not quite what you were asking, Charlie, but we also do that with our transition programming. I know Tonya and her department did a number of surveys, but that's specific to students who went through our special education program.
Yeah, following those 2 questions and comments, I'd be curious in the future to see the sort of enrollment trend graph you have for post-secondary, but is there some way to have a similar comparative graph for things like students going into apprenticeship programs or other, kind of trade education programs? It's interesting how, lots of the different trades you have to work, kind of on the job for a certain number of years and then go through an apprenticeship program to become, licenses or whatever. And so that might be a lot more difficult to keep track of. But, these graphs accounts for 55 to 60% of the students. There's a lot of students in that 45 to 50% that's still out there. So I'd be curious if there's some way to track that in the future. Not that I'm answering out, but just kind of thinking about how to keep track that information.
And I dovetail military as well, for the right folk. I mean, I was in the Guards, and so I would have showed up in the 4-year institution because I used the GI Bill that way, but I know people that go join full up and they're truck drivers and welders, and that's not going to show up here either, so.
Yeah, those 9-month welding programs or 18-month kind of programs.
Any other discussion, comments? Thank you, gentlemen. Brian, I have boots older than you are, playing.
Charlie, before we go on to the next item, Justin, I just want to make sure you're absolutely welcome to stay, but I also know you have a young family, so when you know it's time to go, don't feel like you're going to offend anybody.
I felt he had to stay to help out his fellow workers.
Another question for the chair. So we had discussed at some point kind of the idea of releasing reports. I think these are in the private board docs as attachments. So we don't have to answer this right now, but I'd like us to consider making some sort of process. I think we talked about how great these reports are. And I think that the community would benefit from having somebody to see them and maybe have a running list of here's the reports that have been recently, viewed and approved. After we discuss them and so on, and ask questions and so on. But I think the E4E report we just looked at, and that's great information for everyone in the community to know. Where are students going? What careers are opening? That's just great, basic information. The employment report is really important for people to understand the situation that we're in. And the energy report is a great example of some great things we're doing in this district. So if we can think of a way as a board to kind of release or promote or publish these in a way that's not just maybe on board docs, but something more forthcoming. So.
At least for the interim, my thought was we would have that discussion down on 5I, where we're talking about board committees and reports, to talk about releasing those at least. And I think then of maybe another discussion item for a future meeting would make sense to how we're going to do that in the future for a website or whatever the case may be. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, so on to 5D, right? Yes, 5D, policy 345.6, graduation requirements, first reading.
This policy is brought before the board. This is for early graduation. It's actually a graduation policy, but as part of the policy, there's a portion that talks about early graduation. And what we have found is that the May 1st deadline, the way it's written in policy is very restrictive. Well, we think it's very important to have a May 1st deadline. We think there are situations, whether it be medical reasons or other extenuating circumstances, where the high school principal, I believe, should have the authority to make exceptions. And I am recommending this change to the policy. Any questions?
My question is, so we're just changing this policy now, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Well, it would be. This is the first reading.
Oh, first read, okay, but I mean, but I bet you start next meeting.
Yes.
So what does it do for people that, do they have to wait now a year? I mean, or can this be, I mean, May 1st has already passed, so I guess what I'm asking is there a way for students to take advantage of this now or not?
Yes, in fact, there have been some medical situations where it's only been prudent to allow the student to graduate early. What we're trying to do is have the policy reflect current practice.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion? Okay, we'll bring that back for a second reading at the next meeting then. On to reviewing the Sdma COVID-19 plan.
So, in accordance with federal regulations related to COVID funding, the district's plan has to be reviewed every 6 months. So believe it or not, it's already time for the plan to be on the board meeting agenda. Thankfully, COVID activity in the community has been better. Still not gone, but definitely better than what we saw at the peaks that we had earlier this school year. What we've done is just basically taken our plan and tried to have it reflect what our current practice is for summer school. We do anticipate a more collaborative and comprehensive review of the plan prior to the beginning of next school year, but we do want to meet the deadline and have this on our board agenda tonight. So knowing that this will come back in the future, are there any questions or comments that board members have at this point?
I had a question or a comment about, sorry, I lost the spot now, but related to air quality, filtration, and ventilation. The portion of the plan that pertains to that is very short, it's very brief. And I think that from what I've learned from talking to you, Joe, is that Sdma is actually doing quite a bit more with respect to making sure that we have good filtration and ventilation in our classrooms. As a parent, I wanted to know that, and I didn't have I could have asked my principal, but, apart from that, like having that information, I think really is important to a lot of community members. It's something that all board members received an email question about today. And I'd like to see two things, I guess. And if it's for the purpose of getting a new, updated and voted upon policy in place for right now that would then be revisited and expanded upon later, I guess I'm not saying this has to happen before we approve it, but I'd like to see two things in this section. One is to talk in more detail about the way that the Sdma in our buildings approach air filtration and exchange. And I'd also like that to include information about how the effectiveness of that is monitored, what we do in the schools to monitor it, and what would be the, right now it says that air exchange would be increased, doesn't it say something like air exchange would be increased if mitigation procedures, dictated it? And I guess I'd like to see maybe more of a policy that would be responsive to the conditions in our schools versus an external policy.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and just to clarify, this plan is not going to come back for approval. It's just being reviewed.
Okay.
But certainly we can modify the plan based on board suggestion. What it says right now is that if stricter mitigation requirements become necessary, HVAC settings in all school district buildings will be programmed for an increased amount of air exchange when buildings are occupied. Air filters in the school district will be replaced as scheduled by the Director of Building and Grounds. So yeah, that could be expanded upon. And actually, Justin, I'm glad you didn't leave. This is perfect. Justin is the person who's responsible. And Justin, could you explain where we're at with air filtration and exchange?
Yeah, so when COVID first kind of came around, the fall of 20 is when I believe we implemented some different ways that it's controlled as far as how we utilize outdoor air in our HVAC systems. And I know at that time we also reviewed our level of filtration, and we found that the filters we were using were the highest grade that we can with our current systems. As far as the outdoor air, it runs on a sliding scale based on temperature, just to maintain our safety for our equipment, to bring in as much outdoor air as we can, to increase our total clean air changes. And that's a new program that was set up in conjunction with our mechanical contractor, Barca.
So essentially, since, I think it was actually the fall of 2021, because we closed down the spring of 20, so it would have been the fall of 2020, you're right. So since the fall of 2020, we've basically been running wide open when occupied in terms of outside air. Is that about right?
As long as weather conditions allow.
Yeah.
If it gets, down to 5 degrees below zero, you can't bring in as much outdoor air just because the systems won't operate.
And then do you do periodic CO2 monitoring or other, real measures, not real, but, actual condition measures of air exchange?
Some of our spaces do have CO2 sensors, and those are incorporated into the system. Not all spaces, but there are some of our spaces in our district that do have CO2 sensors. And it can increase the amount of outdoor air it's bringing in if it reaches thresholds that are input into the system.
I'm fascinated by and I have a lot of questions, but I'm not going to take up too much time. But I would love to learn more about which spaces have CO2 sensors, what we could do to make that more available without, incurring a ton of cost.
Well, it sounds like the challenge, right, is we're trying to balance saving 17% of annual energy costs,
Right.
maximizing filtration on fans that can only take so much restriction, and the MERV, if you hear MERV, that's the size of the filter. Plus, let's make sure we have to keep our doors and windows shut for school security, right? That's what we're trying to balance here.
In a climate where the average temperature is less than 32 degrees.
Where, yeah, half the year it hurts your face to go outside. So kudos for everything that you guys have done. I know there was questions about room space filtration, HEPA filters, whatever. And I think one of the suggestions back during COVID, there was homegrown box fan constructed HEPA filters. Did you ever see those going around? It was like a YouTube thing.
That's exactly what that.
Yeah, I looked at it quick, and I'm not for or against the idea. My somewhat concern would be that if we're not using something that's approved by American Society of Engineers or has been tested, are we at some liability for not using a product made for protecting the air around you? So I'm not against the idea of that either. Do we have a policy if a teacher or a family wanted to donate a production model room HEPA filter? Are those allowed? Are they screened by facilities for safety, those sort of things, or?
You want me to
If the answer is no, that's fine.
I don't believe we have a policy that I am aware of at this point. I know it was brought up. There was a family that had looked at donating some, and I know we had put together an ongoing cost analysis for that, and if it made sense, and if they're available, and I believe I had shared that with at least our buildings and grounds director. I'm not sure where that went at this point, if they're in use or not. But I know that question has been raised. I'm not aware of a policy though.
Certainly the high cost is the filters themselves, not the machine. I'm well aware of that. But the other thing that crosses my mind is, really, should we consider an air cleanliness approach or plan that's not just about COVID? Like, I suffer from miserable hay fever, and during the flu season, it's like we all want to breathe clean air. So it may be a bigger conversation than the COVID plan.
I think it is a bigger conversation, and the other thing to consider too, we certainly love partnering with our community, but we also have to consider equity within our buildings. And it definitely can become an equity issue if one classroom or one building or one level has a certain amount of filtration where others may not. Not to say that we wouldn't want to look at better filtration across our whole district, but it is a large conversation.
I think part of that community conversation is what Rachel mentioned is, if there could be a little more detail about what the current kind of HVAC situation is, and people who are particularly concerned about airflow and air cleanliness questions, I think, some of this should be all of us, right? If they have that data, they may, not have to push kind of a kind of tinker toy solution versus a kind of professional HVAC solution, so data is everything.
A couple of points, excuse me. By law, we have to have an indoor air quality plan. We have that for our buildings, right? Additionally, the homegrown solutions or even the HEPA solutions. This room, for instance, was designed for the air to flow in a very specific way and to get the air up and away from the people that are here. Now, if I brought in that device that was shown in that email and set it right here, instead of the air that I exhaust going up and out, it pulls it down there. As it does, it pulls it past Carl and Joe, right? So those homegrown solutions are not always the best way to go, and I appreciate people pointing those things out and giving us those ideas. But we also have to think about our buildings were well designed. It might be different in your home where you don't have as good of ventilation. That picture that was in the email that we received, I built for myself that exact device for my shop to bring in the sawdust and collect that because I don't have a good dust collection system, okay? But that's very different than trying to bring off a virus from someone and filter that through. And I don't have pre-K people running around my shop on a regular basis where they could get their fingers in and those kinds of things either. So very different situation than what we have. Our buildings are well designed, our buildings are well maintained. We're doing a good job with managing them, and not that we couldn't and shouldn't advertise that and show people what it is that we're doing and celebrate our successes. But I just caution people that we don't want to start doing things off on our own either. That may or may not be the way to go. Just my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I fully agree with that, and I think it is really important to communicate better about, or communicate more, get into more detail on this topic in particular about what we are doing and what the status is in our schools, because I think a lot of the, for example, the parent who emailed us today, or the folks who want to donate HEPA filters, people who want to construct these CR boxes, that if they realized what we are already doing and the level of air exchange that's already happening, they might not be as concerned.
The air exchanges are greatly increased over what they were pre-COVID.
Yeah.
That's
right.
For sure. Angie, did you have a comment?
No, I just was gonna speak to that, I was before my time on the board.
It was before my time on the board that we did increase things and make changes for cleaner, better air for everyone. And I was just thinking that you could speak to that in light of the questions that were asked.
Yeah, I do. I think that the changes made were very good changes that were needed. And
In all buildings, or?
yeah, not all buildings work the same, but yes, everywhere we could increase the air exchange we have.
Any other discussion on that? COVID-19 plan? That's where we started there. All right, on to reviewing the work plan for 21-22.
So before we talk about the work plan, I want to thank all of the faculty, staff, the directors, the principals. What we've been able to accomplish over this past year, I think, is very impressive, especially when you consider that we went through 2 peaks of the pandemic. We're all hopeful this time of year, everything was looking great, and we were all hopeful that the 21-22 school year was going to be much more normal. It was anything but normal. I appreciate that the board prioritized the work plan. I think that was brilliant. I think without doing that, it would have been very, very challenging and difficult to really get anything done in terms of the priority. But as the board members go through, you can see that we had all the pillars of our strategic plan Under each pillar, all the prioritized items were able to be completed. And then not just the prioritized items, a number of the items that were not listed as the highest priority were able to be completed. So I guess at this point, I'm not going to go through each item. If there are any questions or comments, now would be a good time.
I just want to say, I think, the work plan is, has a lot of detail and nuance in it. One thing I want to say is I think that Pillar 2, student social and emotional wellness, is a topic which is marked as on hold. That's from last year. That's not quite true in a sense. I think a lot's been going on, but I think I think everyone's aware of this administration. But my view is that this absolutely has to be a priority at this point. And these are all pillars, of course, they're all important. But the combination of physical stress, emotional stress, economic stress, has, I think, really piled on families in a way that we have to find ways to address as quickly as possible.
And you understand that the whole pillar wasn't put on hold, right?
I understand, yeah.
Okay, because there was actually a ton of work done in the area of student mental health, and actually there's a lot more work done just in the past week with a team of educators in our building here. And I think part of this is Tony will be providing her report at the end of June, which is somewhat reflected in here. So I think when you get through her report, you'll have a better idea of what's been accomplished.
Sure. Just to clarify for the audience, so the part that's marked as on hold was review and update the map of SEL curriculum to present to the board. So there's the curriculum review that was the on hold part.
Right.
So that I just make sure we're all on the same page. So I want to make sure I don't over discuss this. We're just looking at what's been accomplished. We're not talking about making revisions for that's separate. That's later, right?
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
That's item H.
Any other questions, discussion? There's a lot of things on here. I worry.
A lot of green on here.
Well, that too. I worry for the future as we discuss upcoming item. Are we able to go deep on a subject when we have so many, or are we just, are we a mile wide and an inch deep? And I think we need to think about being an inch wide and a mile deep instead on some of these things especially. And I think, to Abe's point, the social emotional learning piece for sure. So something to think about as we go through this.
I don't have a specific question, but I wonder if you can say more about the on hold piece under pillar 3. With respect to the communication processes for shared decision making. And I'm sorry, this is something that occurred to me just in the moment scrolling through this. So is that something, are you able to share any more about what you think about that for the coming year, or where you feel like the status of that is?
Well, going into the work plan, what we had hoped to do is restart our QIC groups, our quality improvement committees at both the teacher and hourly staff level, and build upon what had already been established pre-COVID. Unfortunately, those committees were put on hold due to the pandemic. But I absolutely think that there's an appetite for greater definition in terms of how we're going to work at all levels in the district in terms of collaborating. We do have a very strong chain of command. Like I said on some of the other issues, we're talking about grievances and such. Much of the work is done at the building level, but not all of it can. And I think we have very good processes in place, and some of it may be as simple as identifying, articulating, recording the processes. I mean, I think about the program reviews that Brian just got done conducting in the areas of ELA and math. I mean, that's a great process there. But there are other areas, I think, where we could formalize those processes And that simply did not get done. It's on hold.
Thank you.
Any other comments, discussion? All right, so we'll be discussing this again more or less in a moment, right? Moving on to strategic planning. Sorry? What's that? Oh, strategic planning in the Sdma.
So as we move away then from the 2021-2022 work plan, it becomes very important that the board decides what kind of direction you want to provide for the work plan for next year. And Charlie just made a comment about, are we going to look at, going wide and an inch deep, and go, or inch wide and go deep. That's the kind of direction that the board is going to have to determine, because capacity is a big concern. Capacity for our faculty, capacity for our staff, capacity for our leadership team, and how the board decides to move forward certainly impacts what we're able to do. But before we get into developing the work plan, I know board members had questions about the strategic planning process and the creation of the strategic plan that we have right now. So I linked in what's on our website, and I think it does a pretty good job of explaining the process that had gone through. It is a 5-year strategic plan from 2019 to 2024, so we're in the midst of it. One thing I really like about the strategic plan, and I had done my dissertation on strategic planning, I think Menomonie had a very good strategic plan prior to this one that was done with a lot of community input. This one was as well. 1,230 survey respondents, 40 focus groups had met. There were 5 meetings with the steering committee, and we utilized Studer Education as a consultant to help us develop the plan. But one thing particular about this plan that I really think is powerful is the fact that this plan has the ability to stay alive, it has the ability to change the deliverables, develop annual action plans, and I don't think without a plan like this, I don't think we'd be able to really even recognize our strategic plan since it was done pre-COVID and what we have now. Whereas with this strategic plan, I think we have the ability to I think it's malleable. I think we can still use it, but I do think it's worth the board's time to review that plan and to see whether or not the board agrees that it still is usable, because that's kind of the first step. I think we have to decide, is this plan still usable? And then, in terms of the deliverables, those deliverables were set pre-COVID. I think the targets need to be reviewed. That is something we had hoped to do last year, but that was one of those pandemic items that got put on hold. I think that's critical. I think we need to identify what are the deliverables that the board is looking for, and do they need to be modified. And then from there, we need to look at the work plan. What is it that the board wants accomplished over the next school year? And it'll also help inform the process at the next meeting when Brian provides a report on the 2021-2022 scorecard. You'll see what's been accomplished, how things measure up compared to the current deliverables, and then we can go from there. So I'm not going to spend any more time talking about this, but I certainly can answer any questions, any comments, or maybe the board wants to have a discussion in terms of what you see the direction of our strategic plan going.
One question, Joe. I assume that obviously there's a cost that goes along with Studer to do this process with us, and it's very good, but what does it cost when we decide to do this again?
I would anticipate somewhere between $25,000 and $50,000. It's not cheap. I would say that's the easy part though. The dollars, that's just a matter of creating the budget and prioritizing the dollars. It's time intensive and it's labor intensive, and for the board members, I shared with you the action plan that was used to create this strategic plan. It's pretty substantial. Not that every step would have to be recreated, but if you're going to do it right, you're going to be collaborative and you're going to engage the community. It's very resource heavy.
I guess I would like to suggest that the strategic plan as it exists with the 5 pillars and looking at the descriptions of those pillars. I don't know that we need to even discuss major changes to those descriptors and to where we want to go. I guess I'd like to hear from the rest of you, but I think that they're well written in a way that they can be, as Joe said, malleable to change as we as a community want, or we as a board want to change them. Pillar number 2, student social and emotional wellness. That's broad enough that there's a lot of things that can fit in under that we can. Sure. Pillar 1 is career, college, and life-ready graduates. Pillar 2 is student social and emotional wellness. Pillar 3 is our talented workforce. Pillar 4, parent and community partnerships. Pillar 5, facilities and operations. So, as I said, those I believe are very important things, pillars, that should remain, but don't necessarily need to change, at least in my mind. The work plan and how we guide administration to get us closer to that strategic plan, I think is where we need to spend our time.
Charlie, if I could suggest board members, if you're on the website, the poster is one thing, but I think if you actually click on the link there where it says 2019-2024 Sdma strategic plan, it's right under that little poster shot. That'll take you to the full narrative of the plan. And Charlie just read the pillars, and then I think the next step is taking a look at under those pillars, what is the commitment for each of those pillars. And I think those commitments still are relevant. I do think that they could drive what we're doing. I guess the question, a couple things that I think we need to take a look at. One, the strategic actions and deliverables by the end of the plan, are those still relevant? And then in terms of measurable goals, I really think those are probably going to have to be relooked at. There's a lot of baseline setting. I think a lot of those baselines probably or possibly are obsolete in some cases, or definitely need to be modified. But I do think the structure is here for a solid strategic plan, at least for the next couple of years.
I think I agree with that. As I look through the poster breakdown, the pillar title, the commitment and strategies, I think that those 3 are actually largely intact, maybe with minor edits to strategies. Actions, deliverables, a lot of those are looking like they're out of date as of 2024, right? And so, especially under say facilities, right, where the facilities considerations that were under consideration in 2019, many of them have been done or bypassed for other reasons. So I kind of feel like the upper half is pretty good, and the lower half, that's where we kind of get into work plan details.
A helpful exercise might be before we come back next time. If there's something on your mind that we need to be doing this the next year or two, look at this outside of this meeting and say, does it fit under one of these 5 pillars? And I'd be very curious to see if anything we are individually thinking of doesn't fit under one of these 5 pillars already.
Any other thoughts?
As we dig into the pillars, maybe this is the next agenda item, these are 2 kind of mushed together. And we think about work plan details in each of the pillars. Do you have a sense of the smile high versus inch high dichotomy? Do you think it makes sense, Charlie, to go through pillar by pillar in a focused way, or I'm curious what your inclination is.
My thoughts would be to go through each pillar, as Joe suggested. I moved off of that page, but on the pillars and action plans, to go through that document in fair detail would be my thought, to help us understand. I guess in my thought, the first thing is to look at the current work plan and remove all the things that have been completed, so clean that slate, right? So then, are the things that were on hold, are they still necessary to do? Should they remain? and then look at, and if not, then we jettison them. If so, then we keep them. Then look at, okay, now what capacity do we have to add in other things? And again, my goal would be to not have, I don't know, 40 things on that work plan. I don't think that that's, I just don't think that you can concentrate. You're going all over the place. And I don't think that's a good way to do things. My personal opinion.
Well, I think it's like cleaning house in a lot of ways, and, you know, it makes it more so that there's more room for other things, perhaps. And then, like you say, Charlie, we don't want to, you know, make them too intense, but I think it'll help us in the long run, you know, do a better job at completing what we can complete.
Agreed.
As a parent of kids, though, I think that cleaning house is impossible and never ending. So
It's been a while for me.
There's still gonna be light.
All right, any other comments?
Remember those days?
Discussion? Okay.
So what is the timeline, or we should probably talk about that a little bit, of how we need to work through this?
Well, that's item H. We're currently on item F. Actually, item G.
Gotcha.
Right? So,
Wait,
wait just a sec.
I thought we were on G.
We're on G.
Okay.
All right, we're on G. Sorry, my bad.
So Joe pointed out the working copy of the strategic planning action plan. If you click on that document, no, that's not what I was looking at. Where did I find
Pillars
it?
and action plan?
Yeah, I was looking.
That's that. Link to there.
When you look at the work plan, and I know it says pillar 1, pillar 2, to how the strategic plan was originally developed on that document where it has the pillar 1 and then it expands it going over into the columns. It'd be interesting that, like, do you have a copy of that where you can cross it off, this is done, this is done, this is done? So that we can see it in that format?
Are you speaking of the work plan now, or the?
Well, the way that the work plan relates to the strategic plan.
Okay.
I mean, it's two separate documents, but a lot of the content and goals and things like that are on there are done, completed in the work plan, so
I think I
together a little bit.
I think I can visualize what Angie's talking about here, because if you look at the whole strategic plan, you know, the first column is pillar and commitment, and Angie, correct me if I'm wrong once I get there. And then next is key pillar strategies, and then the big one, I think what Angie's referring to are the strategic actions / deliverables by the end of the plan. And I think that would be a good place to start, would be to, you know, strike through any things that have been completed,
Yeah.
and then, you know, highlight the stuff that hasn't.
And then see how are we going to accomplish that, and do we still want to, is it still related, is it still pertinent to what our goals are following COVID,
And I would suggest that if there are other deliverables, it wouldn't be impossible to add them, because, you know, perhaps there is something post-COVID now that would be a higher priority than some of these other things on there.
When you use the word priority, and as we go through this, we really should do what we did last year. We hope things are gonna stay chill, but if they don't, and we have some other surge or something, it was very helpful to have that prioritization. We might as well just do that as we go through the process instead of revisiting it later.
I do have to tell you, I think what we're talking about is a pretty good chunk of,
It's this one.
yep,
Yeah.
we're on the same page,
Okay.
literally.
Okay. Good. Let's never forget.
You know, so, and I don't want to preempt Charlie moving to the work plan on the agenda, but, you know, maybe it is premature to talk a whole lot about the 22-23 work plan. You know, maybe, you know, this is the first item.
We certainly need to discuss the work plan and develop it in the very near future, right? So that you folks can get working on the plan.
And then it also can be in place by fall when school starts.
Having said that, though, I don't want to rush through it and let's make sure that we get it right. So my suggestion right now is kind of what Angie was doing, but taking the current work plan and removing everything that was completed. What's left? That's a discussion point.
The work plan or the strategic
The
plan?
work plan.
Okay.
Because that to me feeds to the strategic plan, right? So what's left on the work plan? And how does that feed to the strategic plan? And how do we feel about how that fits into the strategic plan? Is it still relevant to the strategic work plan, or to the strategic plan? And is it something that we want to prioritize? Then look at the sheet that Angie was talking about and discuss that from the point of view of those deliverables on strategic action deliverables by end of plan. Are those still relevant? Some of them are going to be gone, right, because we've done them.
And
Some of them are no longer relevant.
Some are on the work plan.
And some, some are still on the work plan. I think by the time we get done with that discussion, we'll have a pretty good start, hopefully more than a pretty good start, to what that new work plan should be. That's, to me, what we should do between now and the next meeting, is clean up the work plan, as in get rid of the things that are completed, so that we can look at it clean, and then at the next meeting have a discussion on this strategic plan deliverables and what remains on the existing work plan. Yes?
I think that absolutely could work, and I'm agreeable to that. I guess one thing I would say is that perhaps I would start with the strategic plan and those deliverables, because if everything on the work plan feeds a strategic plan, and if those deliverables are no longer relevant, why even move forward the items on the work plan?
I guess in my mind, as you discussed them through the work plan, you would have come to the conclusion this isn't relevant any longer just through that discussion.
Okay.
But I don't have whatever the group decides, I can go either way. That's not.
What you just described really makes a lot of sense to me, but the idea of focusing on the details in front of us right now and then using that to build into the strategic plan. In terms of the timeline, so is it by the next meeting, so that would be June 27th, 2 weeks from now, right? So assuming that's roughly the process, what what would you want us to come prepared with on the 27th?
Brian will have a report on the scorecard on the 27th.
Okay, good. That'll be helpful.
And we could provide the work plan with the completed items stripped out.
I guess rather than stripped out, can we color code them so we know what?
Or strike through or whatever.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, strike.
And my other only hopefully question is, on something that's completed, some of these things will have a metric with them, right? There's both get it done and get it done to target or to goal, right? So do we need to know this thing got done but we didn't reach the performance target or the, and it's not just an academic, it could be any number of things.
Well, and Brian's not just doing academic, he's doing a scorecard for the entire plan. And on the website, you can see some of the previous scorecards, so I think that would feed in to what Carl's saying. Would you agree, Brian?
I would. We have a color coding system, so, if it's complete and it's on target, it's one color. If it's approaching, it's another. If it's not on target, it's another.
So let's make sure that's obviously in front of the discussion of the plan and the strategic plan and the work plan on the agenda, so that we hear that, all of that first.
So scorecard report, 21-22 work plan with the completed items struck through. And then do you want board members to bring thoughts at that time? Or do you want to get through that first, or what?
I think that's gonna be a pretty heavy lift on its own, given the other things on the agenda that night as well.
Maybe just that one thing, and then the next time, bring back things that we want, perhaps.
Right, because then you'll also, hopefully by the end of that meeting, then we'll be able to have a better understanding of what's remaining and where we want to go, to then start filling in the holes, if you will, at the next meeting.
So I have one confusing technical question, and then one observation. I think that timeline makes sense because the following meeting is July 11th. And at least for myself, having that week of the 4th, and I'll be hopefully on a boat, I'll have time to kind of think about, those items, right, in a way that's like spaced out. But,
You're on the wrong boat, buddy.
But also, I guess, a procedural question, does it matter if this is a special versus regular meeting to these things? Okay, that's.
Okay, that sounds like a plan. You got it down there?
So I have a scorecard report on the 27th. Also bring back the 21-22 plan with the completed items struck through. And then for the July 11th meeting, collect board member thoughts on the next work plan.
Right.
And maybe start to prioritize them.
Right.
Is it possible to also have the strategic plan pillars that Angie mentioned with the strike-throughs as well?
Yes.
Thank you.
For the 27th,
Right, possible.
I think that's a good idea.
I would assume that would play with Brian's. All right. Any other thoughts, questions?
Is the goal, I mean, would that make sense to have the goal be by the start of the school year, have the work plan completed?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think that's fair. I mean, a lot of times we try to have it completed in July, but I think there's plenty of work that can be done in July and August, including this. I think that's absolutely fine.
And even if it isn't completed and voted on, you'll have a pretty good understanding of where we're going prior,
Yeah.
being a part of all of those discussions.
Well, just knowing that we're not tossing the whole plan gives us pretty good direction.
Right.
When would we have results from the staff survey?
That will be November.
Okay. Rachel, the CO2 sensor in here right now is going off. So, a little bit of confusion there whether we were on G or on H, but I believe we've covered H. Does anybody have anything else to say about H? Then my favorite, items related to the next meeting dates, board committees, and reports. 27th, another meeting in June. We'll just discuss a little bit of the agenda for that, the 11th and the 25th.
Which meeting was Tonya going to talk about the student mental health?
The 27th
Okay.
of June.
Thanks.
All right. Then I'd like to add, and maybe we need to discuss this further, but to Abe's question earlier about moving things to the public side of the site, at least as an interim, I would like to suggest, as you did, Abe, that the energy report and the and Brian's report and would Sam's report be appropriate on the public side without being redacted?
I believe so.
Probably.
So, the board just talked about this a few meetings ago. It was with this new board.
Yep.
And the direction that I received was continue with the practice of providing the board with the information first before it goes public. And then what Jenny and I have been doing the day after, the morning after the meeting, we've been moving everything that can go public to public. If the board would like to do something different, we will do something different, but that's the direction we received.
So
You have been doing that.
Yeah,
Okay.
So you're moving everything that you feel is appropriate to move.
We talked about it 2 meetings ago, I think.
yeah, it wasn't long ago.
We talked about it at the retreat as well. But you're moving that automatically,
Yes.
without direction?
No.
Okay.
No.
So everybody's okay with that? And I'm good with that, obviously.
I am too, but one thing I would say is make sure, I mean, obviously you just said it, so, people are listening and the audience will know that. But you might want to preamble, like maybe like how you do your parent things or whatever, community, whatever message, you might want to send a message that says, hey, just because they're not, you don't see them, they will be on later, or some things will be on later, so the public knows. Because sometimes people will look at it and think that nothing's on the public and then never go back and look at it.
You're saying a one-time communication that
Yeah,
you're doing
just a
this?
communication to say that this is what's happening from here on out, because I think sometimes what happens is people will look at it and say, well, it's not a public site, well, forget it, and then they'll forget it and they won't go back and look at it if they're interested, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
And I'd like to, at some point this fall, have a discussion and maybe action on doing something more with that information, whether that's a website or a Facebook page or whatever, so that information is out there. That's good stuff that we've got going here. Let's show people that.
That sounds like, oh, sorry.
When we did have that discussion, somebody on the board commented on a public Facebook page that the school district had, and so I was looking for that between the last meeting and this meeting, and I couldn't find it. And so is that something that's actually going on? The one that I could find is old. It goes back to like 2019, like the last post.
There have been some sparse posts in the last week.
Did you post this agenda? Yeah, so the name of the, we've been posting regularly. Jenny does a lot of it.
Okay.
Sorry, I gotta find this quick.
What is it called?
Menomonie area schools,
Okay.
and it's a business page. So you don't have, it doesn't have to be like friended or anything.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the promotion of this information is as important as the posting itself.
I mean,
Yeah.
even some, like one of the nice energy graphs on our page.
Sounds like you guys have a work plan item for pillar number 4, parent and community partnerships.
Or at E4, it could be a student that learns how to do that with the teacher support.
There you go.
Just question, you're gonna be gone on the 11th? No, okay. Well, I'm gonna be gone on the 11th, I'm just making sure we'll have a quorum, it's 4th of July week. Just, anyone else gonna be gone? Okay.
4th of July week, you're gonna be gone on the 11th.
Well,
Stretch of the week.
got some.
All right. Anything else? Let's let these people go home. All right, let's take a break and then we'll move into closed session.